Hello. With this video, I would like to continue an introductory presentation to the basic subject of this course. We've called it ethics. We could also think of it as moral philosophy. I've suggested that it's in some way a question of both our conduct, our actions, but also the reasons for our actions or the motives for our actions. And so I would like to, again, sort of pick up on a similar theme, but maybe approach it from a little bit different side this time. And in fact, on our first meeting, we read the parable of the blind men and the elephant together. And in some ways, we can think of this course as every one of the 12 weeks of this course that we are attempting to encounter the subject of ethics from a different aspect. And if we do that successfully, by the end of this course, we will have a very comprehensive picture of this subject, of what is at stake. And so we've made our start by approaching ethics from one side, and now our task is to continue attempting to reveal different aspects of it, different dimensions of the same subject. One way to approach the question of sort of what is ethics, or what is morality, what is moral philosophy, fundamentally it's the question of what is the good, or what is right, what is the right thing to do. In some ways that doesn't say very much more than just calling it ethics or morality. But so one way we can attempt to sort of enter into the meaning of those phrases is to attempt to contrast ethics or contrast morality to what it's not. And sometimes by presenting the opposite of something, it reveals the truth of the object in question in that much more clarity. And so one way we can think about this is, if we think of the term moral, we can contrast that with the term immoral. And there we've set up a clear opposition. And so in some ways when we say something is immoral, we mean it's contrary to, or contradictory to what is moral. We can add a third term to this system, and we can say something is amoral. And by that we mean it's neither, we could think of immoral as the opposite of moral, or contrary to moral. We could think of amoral as simply the lack of it, or the privation of it. Like it's not even, it's basically just, it's neither immoral nor moral. It's just what it is. We can take, for example, a stone. Now, when we talk about morality and immorality, there are certain objects that are, those terms are relevant to those objects, are pertinent to those objects. Our own lives, our own actions, our own conduct. This is in some ways the sort of locus, or the epicenter of concern in respect to morality or immorality. There are other things though that those terms are in some ways irrelevant to, or they're not pertinent. It's like we don't talk about physics in our personal relationships. Similarly, we don't talk about morality when we talk about a stone, for example. And so in some ways the stone, it's neither immoral nor moral. But we could say the stone is amoral. Like it's not a pertinent question to ask whether the stone is doing the right thing, so to speak. The stone just does what it does, very clearly. We can think of then, if we consider a stone, we can compare a stone to a flower, like a crocus or a tulip. Now, it's clear that there's a difference between the stone and the tulip. The tulip, or the crocus, the flower, it has some clear development in its life. It has first thing, it's living in the first place, and that entails that it has some kind of clear development or clear evolution in its shape and its form. Every time that we approach the tulip or the crocus, it's changed a little bit. Yeah, so it's growing, it's maintaining itself. But still, at the same time, I think it's very difficult to apply a term to really approach the tulip from a moral perspective and kind of cast a judgment, for example, one way or the other. Another way to think of this is that the tulip doesn't have to be, well, the tulip can't make any mistakes. It can't err. The tulip doesn't have to be educated or instructed about proper conduct, about proper values, right? The tulip, it sort of it does what it does. Yeah. In some way, the tulip is always perfect. We can think of, by contrast to the tulip, we can think of a butterfly. The butterfly, again, there's some kind of qualitative difference between the tulip. It's rooted to the ground. It's a plant. It receives, it takes in the light of the sun for photosynthesis. The butterfly is clearly, it's itinerant. It's not rooted to the ground. It's free. It flies from one flower to the next. At the same time, though, the butterfly, it's hard to apply. It's as though those terms, moral and immoral, they don't have very much purchase still. They still don't have purchase with the butterfly. We can't really evaluate the butterfly's conduct in moral terms. It would be strange to do that. In some ways, again, it's similarly, the butterfly doesn't have to learn how to act. It doesn't have to be instructed. Right? It doesn't have to take its own development in hand. It in some way, it operates, again, for the same reason. It can't really make a mistake because it follows its instincts, and its instincts are basically, in some way, they're perfect. They will always direct the butterfly towards what is instinctually the proper thing to do. If we consider something like a lion, a creature, suddenly we're approaching, there's a qualitative leap from a butterfly to a lion. It's clear the lion has much more, in some ways, much more internal life. Like the lion is clearly has moods, right? It expresses emotions. It clearly has some kind of ability for strategic thought. Like when lions are planning a hunt, right? They're collaborating amongst one another. Still, when if a lion takes down a water buffalo, for example, we are hesitant, or it just seems inappropriate to cast a moral judgment on it, no matter how gory is the scene. If the lion has blood all over its teeth and jaws, we hesitate to draw any kind of moral castigation of the lion, even though it was a violent act. We don't think of it, we don't evaluate it in the same terms as we would save for our own lives, for human beings. When we then juxtapose a lion against a human being, again we have a qualitative difference. The lion, it's clear that in some way they're social animals. They have to a lion. They have to be educated, right? How to participate in the group, and how to feel their proper role within the lion pride, the pride of lions, the tribe of lions. Still, there's a significant difference. It's again a substantial leap if we consider how we evaluate human actions compared to how we evaluate the actions of a lion. Now, clearly there's overlap, right? But just because there's overlap, we're also able to recognize where there isn't overlap. And this is what I would argue, it's really only with human beings that these terms, moral and immoral, they really achieve relevance or purchase. It's like suddenly these terms can be meaningfully applied to actions that human beings perform. With a lion, it's very tenuous. It's not clear how to judge a lion's behavior. In some ways, we might even say that it's not clear that a lion can make a mistake. For the same reason that a tulip can't really make a mistake. It's that the lion is very clearly it's informed. It always knows what to do. It doesn't have questions about what to do. It's always informed by its instinct, which is supreme wisdom that's been developed over millions of years, right, in this lion. And the lion is in some way a pure expression of this kind of wisdom of nature. And every creature is the same way. I've just chosen these specific creatures as examples of, in some way, a sort of a hierarchy of what we might call internalization or inner dimension to experience. It's clear that the stone begins at one level. The tulip is in some way internalizes something. It internalizes a formative principle. So the tulip is changing its own shape. The stone receives its shape from external forces to the stone. The tulip suddenly internalizes those formative principles. When we go to the butterfly or the lion, not only has it internalized those formative principles of growth and shaping its own body, but it's also in some way able to it's able to move itself. It has the capacity of locomotion, right? The tulip can't just pull up its roots and stroll across the garden, right? The tulip is in some way it's fixed to the earth. Animals, though, they have the capacity to respond to their environment. So in some way that means taking in the environment through sensation, and then responding to it, often through locomotion or through action. We then advance to human beings, and it's clear again that there's been a further process of kind of a dimension or internalization of what for the other creatures is outside. In some way, with the butterfly and the lion, they are, as I mentioned, they are in some way they're informed by this kind of wisdom of nature. They have instincts that guide them in every action they perform. They don't have to deliberate about things. They don't have to ponder, right? They don't have to agonize over things. They are in some way connected to instinctual wisdom, again over millions of years. As human beings, we have a little bit of that, but it's also clear that again there is some essential transition to human beings, and suddenly the responsibility is thrust on us to make decisions and make decisions of consequence in a way that, precisely for the reason that we're no longer informed by our instincts in the way that the other creatures are. One way to picture this is that it's in that condition that we have the real application of questions of morality and immorality. Suddenly, because we are making our own decisions, because we are acting from a place of freedom, suddenly we can err, we can make a mistake. We can, in the same way that we can do the right thing. A lion, for example, it always does the right thing in a sense, but just for that reason you can't really call it the right thing in the same way that you can when it could do the wrong thing, right? And wrong, again, right and wrong, I'm using them with a kind of moral inflection, so a good versus evil. Suddenly with human beings, that question is on the table, and we are making decisions with real responsibility, precisely because the decisions are not already made for us by our instincts. Some of them are, of course, and the fact that some of our decisions are made by instinct. For example, I don't need to deliberate about my heart rate, right? It takes care of itself in some way. In some way, it's similar with all of our processes of physiology, and so we share that with the rest of nature, and that is kind of guided by this perfect wisdom of nature. At the same time, though, a substantial part of our lives is conducted out of this freedom, which is also a responsibility, and it's a special kind of responsibility because it's a moral responsibility. So suddenly, with human beings, we have the question of what is the right thing, and precisely because we're asking that question, we also know that we could fail, in the sense we could do the wrong thing, and that makes these questions that much more important, that much more significant, that much more meaningful. And so I hope that through this picture, this kind of a phylogeny of morality, that we can begin to really understand what is at stake when we ask these kind of questions. And again, how morality, it's a concern that is in no way something that that is abstract, that we might speculate about. Right? We can do that, but that alone is not sufficient, because we are, in some way, we are creating our own moral facts by the way we live. And so this is, I've tried to present how, again, to attempt to clarify the concept of ethics or the concept of morality by contrast to it, by saying, like, where is morality not relevant? And I gave these examples like a stone. We might also attempt to, this is kind of approaching now, changing angles on the elephant. So approaching it from a little bit different side, but in a similar way. We might say, how is ethics, or how is morality, ethics, how is it different than any other subject we might study? Like, how is ethics different from mechanical engineering or biology, for instance? And again, I think there's a very important and significant and illuminating distinction to be drawn between a study like the study of ethics and a study like biology. I will choose biology because just to keep the consistent theme with the first example of the phylogeny through the animals. If we can consider a biologist, like suppose the biologist is studying a whale. The object the object of study for the biologist, it's already a fact, like it's there before him or her. The whale is already, it's just the whale is already the case. If we though contrast that to the study of ethics, it's not so simple, because in some way we're not asking questions, purely asking questions of what is, we're also asking questions of what ought to be. So it's a distinction between is and ought, or should be. Another way of thinking of it is a distinction between what is factual and what is ideal. Right? And it's clear that in ethics, we're always considering not only what is the case, but also what ought to be the case. And in some way, our own deeds and our own conduct, it's always in some way it's a confluence, or it's an inflection point between in which our values or our ideals, the ones we each hold personally, in some way those join together with the factual conditions in our environment, and together those things then precipitate out and become a fact. So this is a picture of ourselves creating the facts. Yeah? In a different subject, if we're studying something else, we are approaching facts that are already in some way there for us to discover. With ethics, it's in some way the inverse of that, because we have to first create the facts that we then research. And so I think it's important to draw that distinction, because it again, by separating ethics from what is not ethics, we have a clearer picture of what's at stake. We have a clearer picture of the elephant, so to speak. The last thing I'll say, just by way of introduction, in this second video, is again kind of on the same theme of how is ethics different from from other subjects that you might be studying in the university, for example. And I think I've presented one of them, which is that with ethics, we're actually creating the data that we're in some way researching into. We are creating our own facts by our speech and our deeds. Right? With every word we speak and with every action we perform, there is another fact that we've created. And so then the moral question is, it's not only what is the fact, but also in some way what was the ideal or the value of which the fact was an expression. Right? What was the motive behind the fact? And so with ethics, we're always attempting to not only approach the kind of outer dimension, but also the inner dimension. Yeah? And only those two together give us a comprehensive picture of what is at stake with this subject. And so one final significant difference between ethics and another subject that you might study is that most other subjects that you will study, they concern a certain kind of intelligence. They make use of a certain kind of intelligence, and that kind of intelligence, there are different ways to think about it, but we could think of it as something like an instrumental intelligence, and that's just a phrase that I'll use, and I hope that I can explain what I mean by that phrase, and we could probably give it a different name. But that's the name I've chosen for now, and we can always revise the name at a later occasion. But so if we think of instrumental intelligence, this is the kind of intelligence that helps us figure out and helps us achieve a goal. So it helps us basically. It's a strategic kind of intelligence. It helps us achieve something. It helps us get from point A, where we're starting from, to point B, which is our goal. And so you can imagine there's, we all know that we can be quite clever. If we know what we want to achieve, we can be quite clever in bringing about the desired results. That's an expression of this kind of instrumental intelligence. Suppose that you're studying for a test in one of your other courses. It's clear that you have a goal, which is to achieve a certain performance on the test. If you're intelligent, you will approach the goal in a reasonable way, right? In a clever way. So you will through the actions that you perform, you will find a way to prepare yourself to succeed on the test, right? And so this has to do with being able to, right? So this instrumental intelligence, it's necessary to synthesize information and data around you in order to put it to your own use, right? In order to order it towards the goal that you've determined. That's one kind of intelligence. That's clearly a very important kind of intelligence, and it's probably the first, one of the first things when we use the term intelligent or smart or clever. That's probably what comes to mind. Something like that. Something like a strategic capacity to achieve a certain outcome. That's one kind of intelligence, but that's not the only kind of intelligence. And in fact, that kind of intelligence is also important in the studies that we will be doing in this course. But it might even be more a second kind of intelligence is perhaps more important to ethics. And I think it's safe to say that the second kind of intelligence that I will attempt to describe in a similar way to the way I attempted to describe the first one. I think this kind of intelligence is in some ways unique to a subject like ethics or other philosophical subjects. It's in some way a specifically philosophical kind of intelligence. I don't know what to call it, but we could call it philosophical intelligence, or maybe theoretical intelligence would be a good thing to call it. I'll try to explain what I mean, and I can field or solicit other advice for what a good name for this kind of intelligence would be. But I will attempt to describe what it is, and then maybe one of you, somebody who's watching this video, will be able to come up with a better term. This is the kind of intelligence. So recall that the first kind helped us to basically achieve or figure out or strategize work through different tactical maneuvers to achieve a certain end. This second kind of intelligence that comes to its own in a study like ethics, it's rather the kind of intelligence that helps us to discern which ends are worth pursuing in the first place, right? And so this is why I called it theoretical intelligence, to contrast it to practical or instrumental intelligence. This is the kind of question this is the kind of intelligence that questions or evaluates our own structures of value, right? And so this is the kind of intelligence that allows us to critically approach our own values, which are often, despite that they're in some way the most important things to us. They're kind of the most fundamental parts of who we are. It might be just for that reason that we ordinarily don't make them clear to ourselves. We don't articulate them to ourselves. And so this is the kind of intelligence that can enable us to do that. And it's the kind of intelligence that is able to perceive it's able to recognize what is the good, or it's able to recognize what is right in the first place. Yeah. And so the second, in some ways, I said the first kind of intelligence is instrumental kind, and the second kind is theoretical kind, or philosophical kind. But in some way, I reversed the order, because the first kind always, in some way, it presupposes decisions that were made by the second kind. In other words, we can't apply the kind of practical or instrumental intelligence to achieve a certain outcome for ourselves, unless that outcome is already in place, like unless we already have determined what we value, right? Like what is valuable to us. And so I hope that's at least a clear picture of two different strata, or two different dimensions of thinking. And both of them are important, so I don't mean to suggest that one of them is more important than the other kind. What I do want to emphasize, though, is that the kind that I call theoretical intelligence, it's a different way of thinking than we're ordinarily accustomed to. And so our course, our 12 weeks together, this is an opportunity for us to try to explore and then also develop, to explore and develop our own capacity for this kind of intelligence. And so with that, I will close this lecture. In some way, I hope that what I have said today has contributed towards, again, just clarifying our elephant, so to speak. I hope that the three different points that I've made today will, in some way, help us to, they will help us to fill out or achieve a more comprehensive picture of this subject that we're studying. Right, and so again, we've talked about how two different kinds of intelligence, which is the most recent thing, and so the theoretical compared to the practical intelligence. We've talked about how ethics, the subject of ethics is different from other subjects, because we are in some way participating in to bring about the very facts that we then study. I also framed this as the is-ought distinction. And ethics, unlike other subjects, which are mostly concerned with the is side of this dichotomy, ethics is also concerned with the ought side, right? Or what is an ideal. It's what is factual compared to what we wish to be the case, right? Or what could ideally be the case. That was the second point that I made in this video. And then the first one was to kind of present a picture of some kind of phylogeny, or ascending hierarchy of relevance of the term morality or ethics. And I tried to show how a term like morality or its opposite, immorality, neither one of those terms really makes sense in application to many things. And I use the example of a stone, but I tried to show how it becomes, in some way, it becomes increasingly relevant as we approach a human being, and that the question, the moral question, it's really it's most germane to us, to you and to me. And so I hope that each of these three things has again served to illuminate the subject from a specific angle. And again, I hope that through this course we can just continue with this project, and by the time we finish, we will have established a very detailed understanding of the subject. So thank you for your time today, and farewell until next time.